You're listening to the Like and Follow podcast presented by Milk by Digital.
Welcome to Like and Follow, a podcast exploring social media and digital marketing presented by Milk by Digital. I'm Ben, and on this episode, we're talking about marketing in the age of the conscious consumer. Joining me today, I have two members of the Milk Bar family. I have Katina.
Hello.
And I also have Liz joining me as well.
Howdy.
Now, when we talk about marketing in the age of the conscious consumer, what exactly are we talking about there, Liz?
I think that essentially we're talking about how to market to people that care about things like sustainability, environmental factors. So you're looking at like customers that care about things like single-use plastic, that care about how their garments are being made, who's producing it, things like that.
And that's sort of come out of a whole bunch of different things, including the socio-political climate around climate change and renewability and reusability and sort of things, hasn't it?
Yeah, definitely. I think when you're looking at things like how Generation Z is responding to these things, it's like no wonder that why these kind of like things have started to be brought to the forefront, and then how consumers are starting to kind of care about these things now and as really starting to pay attention and demand from brands, well, why are you like producing an item this way? Why isn't this item recyclable, etc., and things like that.
I think there's been a big change, I guess, in how people buy things these days. I think previously if someone wanted, let's just say they wanted a new pair of shoes. If the pair of shoes was $50 and someone else was selling them for $10, they'd rather just buy the cheap one because they think it does the same thing. Whereas nowadays people might be like, hang on, why is that pair of shoes only $10? Where is it made? Is it actually going to be something that's going to last me a long time? What's the quality like? What sort of materials were used? So I think that it's kind of really changed how people just buy things, and it's kind of stemmed off that.
Katina and I kind of, I suppose, like regularly like discuss like these little bits and pieces, and like we'll often see influencers kind of like sharing things like tips on like where to buy environmentally friendly products, to anything kind of, I suppose, like brands that are kind of ducking those kind of questions to brands that are doing really well in those factors. I think definitely now where like consumers have the power to really research, like if brands are kind of like aren't doing those things, consumers can find out now. It's just like typing a few things on a keyboard and you'll be able to find out like brand's history, finding out how they like rate for things like sustainability, what they use to make their packaging, kind of like anything like that. Consumers can easily find out that information now. And I suppose a lot of consumers aren't really tolerating brands that like aren't doing those things anymore. So a lot of brands have started to kind of realize like, hey, we really need to get like onto this.
Yeah, I think it's probably something that in the past, maybe brands have thought, only a small niche of people actually care about that. So maybe it's not worth us putting all these time and resources into figuring out how we can be a better brand behind the scenes. But now that they realize more people are caring, they're like, hang on, our customer actually cares too. So it's time to act.
Do you think this has come about from the influencer practice of using their influence to try and create positive change in the world?
Definitely. I think before, when I guess you look back a few years ago, influencer outreach was very much, hi, I'm this influencer, I'm receiving this product, this is why it's cool, this is why you should buy it. Whereas now they are feeling a lot more empowered to not only talk about products like they typically have done in the past, but to also talk more about the brands themselves, to really educate their followers as well. Because a lot of the time, information like this isn't easy to find. So I think that influencers understand that, and they want to really use their following and really try to educate people that way.
Yeah, I think like what Katina was saying, like the information might be out there, but it's like it involves a little bit of like effort to find. So now you're having kind of influencers and I suppose people with a social following that can easily pass on that information in an easy, digestible way to their followers, who kind of like will just like scroll past it, might see like a cute infographic, like where are my clothes made, or like even like little ones, bits and pieces that I've seen personally have been like, is this recyclable? And it will have like a few items, yes or no. And just like that really digestible kind of like format that as consumers, as we're like in our scroll culture, just kind of like keep flicking past. It's like really easy to read, really easy to understand. And in today's shareable culture where you just can like share a post onto your stories, it kind of like spreads quite rapidly.
Do you feel like this has sort of pushed brands to be more authentic in their marketing, or is the authenticity part of marketing another conversation that needs to be had?
I think in terms of what we're discussing now with more the environmental impacts, we're kind of seeing a few different things happen. So we're kind of seeing newer brands come forward, and I suppose existing corporations and things starting to legitimately pay attention to this. I suppose like being mindful of like their contribution to the environment and things. So newer brands kind of that at the core of what they do, their values is about sustainability. But then we're also kind of seeing as well brands that will kind of be almost be doing it to meet a like a little checkbox, and kind of like doing it in a way that's like, oh, like as long as we say recyclable or like recyclable fabric in the name, it'll all be fine. I think the problem with this is that, as we were saying before, consumers are getting savvier, we're getting smarter, we're starting to ask more questions. So when it comes to, I suppose, marketing to the conscious consumer, if you are going to do it, I think you have to do it authentically. Now that we know if something isn't authentic, I feel like in this age now, we can just figure it out.
There does seem to be much more of a push for the authenticity in marketing, and the idea that you can find this information out from a lot of different places has come at, and I want to say it's a good thing for a marketer to think about. What are your thoughts, Katina?
Yeah, I think back off what Liz has said, I think it's kind of interesting to look at a new brand versus an established brand, because I guess when you're a new brand, you don't really have everything in place. So if you say that you want to actually become sustainable, that you want to have packaging that's biodegradable or compostable, that's something that you can do from the beginning. So it's a lot easier for these brands to kind of make sure that everything they do leads down this sort of path. Whereas when you've got already established brands, it can be a lot harder because you already have all these processes and things sort of in place. So I think the thing as well is that, I guess we've kind of spoken about how the customer has, a fair few expectations. But I think that as long as brands are showing that they're trying to do the right thing, they might not even have to be doing it yet. But as long as they're showing and they're having that authentic conversation with their audiences, with their customers, and say, hey, we're trying to do these things. What are your thoughts? This is what we're thinking. Let's kind of like all kind of jump on this together to make a change. So I think it's important that even, if it is sort of hard to do, it's something that you're quite honest and open about with your customers, because they're going to really appreciate that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I've seen kind of like brands that someone might in their Instagram comments being like, hey, I noticed you don't do this. And the brand will respond with like, hey, thanks for your feedback. Really appreciate this. We love hearing your suggestions. And then they kind of like create a dialogue. And it's like you were saying before, like, I think for us consumers, it might be almost like a little bit unreasonable to expect that a brand is, 100% sustainable. It's very unlikely to happen. But as long as I think like brands are listening to their consumers, and they're kind of paying attention and creating that dialogue, I think that's like a good start as well. So in a way, I think like kind of while we are kind of getting smarter, and we're kind of like figuring out like what is and isn't sustainable, what is the right product, and what are the right fabrics, what are the right materials we're using to make things. I think we also need to have a little bit of like empathy, I suppose, in a way, as consumers to brands, that like they're not going to have everything figured out straight away. And like as long as they're, I suppose, like creating that dialogue and not kind of, I suppose, just pretending to, or like kind of like brushing things under the rug. And like I think it's almost like a two-way accountability.
So with this idea of authenticity and using environmentally conscious methods, there have been quite a number of brands that, as we were saying, might not be using them in the correct way, might just be slapping that label on and hoping for the best. this is kind of what we like to term greenwashing. Now, when a brand is using that incorrectly, how do you feel that sort of affects how consumers see that brand moving forward?
I think it comes back to the authenticity thing, first of all. If you're saying that you're doing one thing, but your consumers can find out you're not doing it in the way that you're describing, or you're using manipulative language to kind of pretend you are, almost, in a way. Like I was saying before, I just think like now in today's, like in 2020, like we're not stupid anymore. Like consumers, we can find out everything. Um, I I think there's just been like a lot of brands that, like, things that have happened, kind of like, I suppose they've essentially kind of like greenwashed their products or something, and then they've seen like a huge backlash through social media, which I almost think is worse than trying to do something. It's almost like they shouldn't have even bothered in the first place. If you're not going to do it authentically or do it in the correct way, why bother?
It's quite interesting. And I think a part of it also comes down to there's not actually that many, I guess, like rules or legislations and things around how you sort of label things. Like unless your product is something really specific, like a prescription or like medicinal or something like that, I think that the guidelines and everything are quite relaxed. So if you slap the word eco into something, or the word green, or it is free from X or XYZ, just because they might be doing that one benefit doesn't mean that the rest of what they're doing is also okay. And just because they say something might be eco, it's like, well, how are you eco? You can't just say that we're an eco brand. You've got to actually walk the walk, let people know how you are making those steps. So for example, if a brand sells products and they say these products are fully recyclable sort of after you use them, some customers might also already be upset with that. So instead of, encouraging customers to recycle, how about they encourage their customers to reuse? Is there, some materials, what about the processes that actually went into making that recyclable product? Has it, traveled all over the world, creating all these carbon emissions, et cetera, et cetera? So just because the product might say something, consumers are going to be thinking a lot more about it. So I think that when brands try to use green terminology, whether it be in their product name, in their brand name, or on their website when they talk about their practices, I think instead of just saying what they're doing in a one word form, they have to really elaborate on that too.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting when you said about how there's no kind of, I suppose, like, there's not a rule book. So you can use those words like eco or add the word green in front of things to almost like give the illusion rather than actually actively participating in like something like this. So I think that's like definitely very interesting, and something, I suppose, for consumers, if they do care about these things, that they should be mindful of.
It can even be in terms of how a product looks. So for example, if someone's packaged up a new shampoo, and instead of it coming in what looks like to be a regular plastic bottle, it comes in something else, but it's not actually recyclable. It's like they might make it look like it's recyclable, but at the end of the day, it actually isn't. So something like that could also be quite deceptive.
Yeah, I've been like, I suppose, like slightly steering this conversation. I suppose like a similar kind of like industry where there's like lots of debates around things with like makeup and skincare about being cruelty free. First of all, there's a lot of debate what is cruelty free, and then going back on that packaging, you'll have skincare brands that will kind of use things like green packaging and will have like forest kind of imagery, or have like, images and using like bunnies and stuff in them, but then they might not necessarily follow through on cruelty free practices. And then similar to, I suppose, what we were saying earlier, when you can add things like eco, green onto things like similar to that industry, cruelty free hasn't actually properly been defined, and there's like little bits of like nuances and things too.
In terms of the whole labeling of products, what does this mean for consumers, do you think? Does this mean that they need to do more research before they purchase something, Liz?
I think now that we're fortunate enough that we do have that information, so I think if a consumer does really care about these types of things, that yes, they should be doing more research. So whether that be kind of like looking at guides and things, Googling about like different types of like fabrics and products that are being used in it, or even kind of like, I suppose, what we were saying before, following influencers that will post various little bits and pieces and information about it so you can, I suppose, know what to look out for when buying and consuming products and things like that.
In terms of what this means for marketers as well, how do you think that affects people in our industry, how we do our job, Katina?
I feel like it kind of just goes back to being honest, really. I feel like you could spin it off in a lot of different ways, but it's just like if your products don't actually have a green origin, don't slap the word green on there just because you think it might help pull in some customers, because at the end of the day, it might do the opposite. I think it's just about being honest and making sure that like I said before, even if it's not something you're currently doing, if it's something you're thinking of doing, even just getting the opinion of your customers. For example, you might have a product that has been the same since the dawn of time, and you've had this one product, you've got a really loyal customer base. If you ask them, hey, we're thinking of going down a more sustainable route, but if we do, it might change the formulation. Are you happy for that? What are your thoughts? Because you might actually find that some people might prefer to have what they already know and all that kind of thing. So again, it's kind of like bringing back that conversation with your customers. But yeah, I guess if you do want to be a brand that's taking the right steps, then definitely be open and transparent about that. And if you're a brand where this isn't really one of your large concerns or something that you want to sort of roll out across your products, then maybe just stay away from the terminology.
I think, I suppose, like going off what Katina says, in my mind, for, I suppose, in the marketing perspective, I think two things really come up for me. So the first one being that generally if you're a brand and you want to participate in these things, you're doing it, I suppose, for the greater good, but you also want to convey that message because you want to attract that, I suppose, that audience that cares about these things too. So you want to attract people that, like, if you're passionate about climate change, and I suppose, and that's in your ethos, you're also going to attract people that are passionate about climate change too. And then in that regard, it also comes back to the whole authenticity thing again, because these people that are passionate about it, they're going to be able to smell it out if you're not kind of like participating correctly, for a lack of a better word there. And I think the second thing comes down to another thing where you talk about, like, with community management, just making sure that you're open, keeping an open dialogue. So things like if people are asking questions, don't be deleting comments and things like that, or don't be like ducking questions when you can kind of like, when your audience can see straight away, hey, they haven't responded to this, why aren't they responding? Or if they're kind of giving like a wishy-washy answer, they're like, why aren't you, if you have nothing to hide, why aren't you responding? So it might just be kind of a thing in a way, just being like, hey, no, we haven't implemented this, but we're really interested in hearing about what your thoughts. We want to keep improving. I guess just having an open mind when it comes to like community management and responding to your customers online when they are asking about these things.
I think that's a really good point. I think that especially because some customers might even kind of jump the ball before researching a company. They might already be interrogating them through their social media channels. Why do you do this? Why don't you do that? Do you do this? And I think that sometimes if a brand isn't taking those steps yet, they might get a bit nervous. And I agree that they might feel like the best point of action is to delete or hide or block or something like that. But the thing too is that people are also aware of those practices too. So if you are a brand that is doing that and deleting things, when people are just trying to have an honest conversation to see if you're sustainable, then that might not be the best look for you either. So I guess, it does come back to that authenticity and making sure that you are having a conversation and being honest that, sorry, we're not doing that at this stage, but, we are doing these things instead because this is, the path that we're going to take to get to that thing in the end. So being honest like that.
Yeah, and I do think, even though it's definitely coming up a lot more in conversation, I generally think consumers don't 100% expect that brands have everything figured out. But as long as like brands are showing that they're making the steps, or they're, they're creating a dialogue, or they're opening to listening, I think that's like the main thing as well. I think as long as you're not, I suppose, engaging in like shady kind of tactics and like I said, like deleting comments or kind of like trying to like manipulate your audience to thinking you're doing one thing and not the other. I think as long as I suppose it all comes down to authenticity in a way. Are you being honest with your customer?
So we've spoken a lot about how consumers can do research into companies to see how they are stacking up in terms of eco or in terms of cruelty-free, what are some of the resources that if people are looking to look into these practices, where could they go?
I feel like the first one is the brand's website. I think that a lot of information should be on there. So I think that if a brand is saying that they are eco or that they are green and you can't really find anything on their website, that might be an indication that you need to do a bit more digging. That could be maybe getting in touch with them via a DM, messaging them on Facebook, or even it could just be sending them an email or giving them a call. But I think that if a brand is taking the right steps and they are a brand that is eco, they're probably going to be quite proud in sharing what they're doing. So having a really good read of the resources that they have on their website, and having a look at also the packaging too. Like often when you buy something, it will, or even if you're just browsing in the store still, you'll be able to see a lot of things on there, like whether or not something is recyclable, where was it made. And again, if a brand is really happy that, for example, this oil that we're using is from Queensland, that's going to be in there. Whereas if a brand maybe isn't disclosing where things are from, etc., that could be an indication that you might want to get in touch with them. So other than, I guess, their website and their packaging, you can obviously just chuck them in a Google search with the words sustainability, ethics, etc. I'm sure if you might have a look at some reviews, or maybe have a look at some tagged photos that they're in on social media too, that could be a good one. There is also a really good app available. It's called Good On You. So it's mainly for businesses in the fashion sort of realm. And what it does is it rates businesses on how sustainable, how ethic they are. So that can be a really good one if you are really interested in that.
In terms of from a brand perspective, what are some of the things that brands can do with their products and marketing?
I think one thing lots of brands can do is, I suppose, like starting small would be like how your products are being sent out. So for example, I suppose like a big Australian brand, Mecca, were criticised previously for the way they were sending out their products, lots of like plastic, and a lot of their beauty loop boxes, they were including lots of like information about the products, which is great because consumers want to know, but they were also at the same time heavily criticised for the amount of like paper and things that were used. And I think something that really great that they did is they actually acknowledged that, and they were acknowledged that they were receiving a lot of these complaints and actually changed that. So now they offer a different alternative. So you can get your products delivered in recycled packaging, and for their beauty loop boxes, instead of containing all the information about their product into the box, they've put that information online and have a whole different landing page for that. So I think that's a good example of something that seems quite small but is easy for brands to start, I suppose, like thinking about things like how their products are being sent out. And also it's a great example of a brand listening to their consumers and doing it in a way that acknowledging, hey, this is what you've said, we want to improve, this is what we're doing now. So kind of not hiding away from like, or deleting comments or pretending, oh, we've always been recyclable, kind of a way that like, hey, we're listening to you, we're going to do better, kind of a thing.
So I guess in my own sort of consumer behavior, I'm trying to become a bit more of a conscious consumer. So something I've tried to do is buy products that are in, I guess, no packaging or very little packaging, or the packaging needs to be biodegradable, combustible, or recyclable. So a website that I really like to use is Flora and Fauna. So they have all these sorts of amazing products that I kind of just touched on. So I get a lot of my products from them. But last time I ordered, I actually noticed that they actually offset all their carbon. So there's a really big page on their website talking about it, where they offset the delivery, they offset the electricity used in their warehouse, their office, even their team's cars. So I feel like that's a really good example of how a brand is taking it seriously, not only in the products that they sell, but literally the entire chain, really.
Yeah.
And I really liked how informative they were about that too.
I think it's like definitely as well worth considering too. A brand could be doing all these things to their products and packaging, but it's also now moved to that thing of like, how are they actually operating in their stores or in their head office? So whether, you know, they could be producing really amazing recyclable products, but are they actually following that own practice in their business as well?
Thanks so much for joining me, Katina.
Thanks for having me.
And thanks for joining us, Liz.
No worries. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Like and Follow, and for joining us for the first season of Like and Follow. We're going to take a bit of a break for the moment, but we'll be back soon. In the meantime, if you're looking for a hand with your social media and digital marketing, Milk Bar Digital is here to help. You can get in contact with us at hello@milkbardigital.com.au, and remember to like and follow us on all the socials at Milk Bar Digital.